Welcome to the library, friends. And today we are looking at the ultimate secret history that the scientific establishment tried to bury for centuries. Imagine it is London in 1936, and while the world is bracing for war, a secret auction is happening that would shatter everything we thought we knew. When Sir Isaac Newton died, his family and the Royal Society looked at his private papers and absolutely panicked. They didn't find just math and physics. They found over 1 million words dedicated to the occult, magic, and a singular terrifying obsession with a green stone slab from ancient Egypt. This was the legendary Emerald Tablet, and Newton believed it was the literal source code for the universe. He spent his life trying to translate it in secret. Today, we are prying those trunks open together. Before we get into the mystery, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments which dark history you want to hear next. To understand why this paragraph was so dangerous, we have to look at the world of the 17th century, a time when the line between a chemist and a sorcerer didn't really exist. Back then, the smartest people on the planet were part of a secret tradition called alchemy, and they weren't just trying to turn lead into gold. They were trying to find the divine blueprint of creation. They believed that the ancients, the people who built the pyramids and mapped the stars, possessed a pure knowledge called the Prisca Sapientia that had been lost after the Great Flood. The world was seen as a giant riddle left by the Creator, and every intellectual giant from the Renaissance through the Enlightenment was hunting for the one master key that could solve it. This was a world of absolute secrecy, where talking about your research could get you executed or thrown into the Tower of London, especially if your research suggested that God used magic to build the laws of nature. The story of the Emerald Tablet itself sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Legend says it was carved into a slab of a mysterious, indestructible green substance that wasn't quite glass and wasn't quite stone. Some stories claim it was found in a cave in Hebron, clutched in the skeletal hands of Hermes Trismegistus himself by a traveler named Gallienus. Others say it was Sarah, the wife of the biblical Abraham, who discovered it hidden deep within the Great Pyramid of Giza. Regardless of the myth, by the time the text reached Europe in the 12th century via Arabic translations, it was treated as the most sacred document in existence. It was said that the text was written by a being who had survived the fall of Atlantis and possessed the wisdom of all three parts of the universe. And this was the text that Newton kept on his desk every single night. At the center of this mystery is the mysterious figure of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice-great king, priest, and philosopher. In the ancient world, people believed he was a fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of writing and magic, and the Greek god Hermes. He was considered the father of all arts and sciences, and the Hermetic tradition he inspired became the backbone of Western mystery schools. But it wasn't just ancient gods, it was also the scholars who risked their lives to protect this text, from the Islamic alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan to the medieval monk Albertus Magnus. These men believed that the tablet held the secret of the one thing, a substance or force that could bridge the gap between the spiritual world and the physical world. And Newton saw himself as the latest and perhaps last in this long line of chosen guardians. The tablet begins with a phrase that haunted Newton for decades. It is true without error, certain and most true, that which is below is like that which is above. This simple idea suggests that the entire universe is a single, interconnected organism. Newton spent years analyzing the claim that all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. In modern terms, we might call this the Big Bang or the unified field theory, but to Newton, it was a biological and spiritual truth. He believed that if he could understand the one thing, he could understand how a planet stays in orbit and how a plant grows from the soil using the same set of rules. This wasn't just philosophy for him, it was a technical manual for how energy becomes matter, and he was determined to translate that poetry into the language of mathematics. While Newton was becoming the famous face of the Royal Society, he was living a complete lie. By day, he was the rational, sober professor of mathematics at Cambridge, but by night, he was a sorcerer's apprentice. He built secret furnaces at Trinity College and spent his own money importing rare chemicals and strange minerals from all over Europe. He didn't have many friends, and his assistant, Humphrey Newton, recorded that his master barely slept and would often forget to eat, his eyes red from the toxic fumes of his experiments. He lived in constant fear of the heresy laws of the time, knowing that if his obsession with the Emerald Tablet were exposed, he would be stripped of his titles and likely imprisoned for practicing multiplication, which was the illegal alchemical process of trying to create gold. The conditions in Newton's lab were absolutely nightmarish. He was working with mercury, lead, and arsenic without any kind of protection, literally tasting his experiments to see if they were progressing. We know this because when researchers tested a lock of his hair centuries later, the mercury levels were high enough to cause a normal person to go insane. He was following the tablet's instruction to separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, which he interpreted as a chemical process of purification. He believed that if he could create a pure enough substance, it would act as a magnet for the divine forces of the universe. And his notebooks are filled with drawings of strange symbols and descriptions of green lions and star regalias that sound like madness to a modern scientist, but were actually part of his rigorous, secret search for truth. The moment that changed human history happened when Newton stopped looking at the tablet as a way to make gold and started looking at it as a way to understand gravity. He realized that if as above, so below was true, then the force that made an apple fall to the ground in his garden had to be the exact same force that kept the moon in its path around the earth. Before this, people thought the heavens followed perfect divine laws and the earth followed dirty physical laws. Newton used the Emerald Tablet's logic to unify the universe. He bridged the gap that had existed for thousands of years. He realized that the invisible spirit the alchemists talked about was actually gravity, an invisible force that connects all matter, regardless of where it is in the cosmos. To prove this hermetic connection, Newton had to invent an entirely new branch of mathematics because the math of his time couldn't handle moving objects. He created calculus as a tool to map the flow of the universe. In the tablet, it says, "It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth." And Newton saw this as a description of the constant exchange of energy and force. He decided to hide his mystical inspirations behind a wall of cold, hard numbers. When he published the Principia Mathematica, he left out all the talk of the Emerald Tablet and Hermes Trismegistus, giving the world the pure science they wanted while keeping the magical source for himself. This secret life made Newton incredibly paranoid and led to some of the greatest feuds in scientific history. He absolutely hated Robert Hooke, who was a materialist and didn't believe in invisible forces like gravity. Newton felt that Hooke was too gross to understand the subtle truths of the tablet. The drama was so intense that Newton reportedly waited until Hooke died to become the president of the Royal Society, and once he was in power, he supposedly ordered the only known portrait of Hooke to be destroyed. Newton also fought with Gottfried Leibniz over who invented calculus, a battle that was partly fueled by Newton's fear that Leibniz was also using alchemical secrets to gain an advantage. Even the world of psychology was changed by this one paragraph. Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist, spent the last years of his life studying the Emerald Tablet and alchemy. He realized that the great work wasn't about changing metal, it was about changing the human soul. He saw the tablet as a map for individuation, the process of bringing the light of consciousness into the darkness of the unconscious mind. The phrase "as above, so below" became "as within, so without," teaching us that the chaos we see in the world is often a reflection of the chaos inside our own heads. And by fixing ourselves, we can start to fix reality. The ultimate alchemy was always the transformation of the self. When Newton died in 1727, he left behind a massive problem for his heirs. They opened his chests and found thousands of pages of magic that threatened to ruin the reputation of England's greatest genius. They made the calculated decision to hide the papers. For 200 years, the public was told that Newton was a perfect rationalist who only cared about math. It wasn't until 1936, when the economist John Maynard Keynes bought the papers at auction, that the truth came out. Keynes famously said, "Newton was not the first of the age of reason, he was the last of the magicians." The cover-up was so successful that even today, many science textbooks refuse to mention that the law of gravity was inspired by an alchemical poem. So, at the end of the day, What was the Emerald Tablet really? Was it a gift from the gods, a lucky guess by an ancient philosopher, or a literal map of the universe? For Isaac Newton, it was the only thing that made sense in a world of confusion. It gave him the courage to see the invisible and the math to explain the impossible. Maybe the real philosopher's stone isn't a rock that turns lead into gold, but the human mind's ability to find meaning in the mystery. The one thing is still out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the next curious cat to come along and decode it. Keep your eyes on the stars and your minds open, friends. I'll see you in the next one. Today, the Emerald Tablet's legacy lives on in the search for a theory of everything. Physicists like Stephen Hawking spent their lives trying to find a single equation that explains the entire universe, which is exactly what Newton was doing with his furnaces and his green stones. He was hunting for the unified code of all existence. Every time we use a GPS, which relies on the laws of gravity and relativity, we are using the hermetic wisdom that Newton decoded. We have built a world based on the magic of the 17th century, proving that what was once occult is now the foundation of our logic. And we are now looking toward the stars to see if the above has even more secrets left to reveal. The search for the source code continues. What is truly mind-blowing is how modern science is actually catching up to the Emerald Tablet. In the 20th century, we discovered that we can actually turn lead into gold using particle accelerators. It's just incredibly expensive and useless. The tablet's claim that all things are made of one thing is now the basis of particle physics. When we look at the subatomic level, we see that everything is just vibrating energy. Even gravity, the force Newton first unified, is now seen as ripples in the very fabric of reality, gravitational waves that connect every atom in the universe. Just as the tablet whispered, the subtle forces that Newton hunted for are now called electromagnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces, proving that the ancients had the right idea. They didn't have the machines to measure it, but the wisdom was always there, waiting for us to find the right language to describe it.